We are following breaking news as it relates to conflict in the Middle East. Take a good look at your screen. This is video taken from the scene early this morning. A shooting attack intended at Israeli forces at a border crossing kills 3 civilians, with the shooter killed at the scene. The attack happened Sunday at a border crossing between the West Bank and at Jordan. Israeli forces saying a gunman approached the Allenby Bridge crossing from the Jordanian side in a truck, got out, then opened fire at the security forces. 3 civilians were killed, and the security forces killed the assailant in a shootout. A rescue service saying at this hour all of the civilians killed were men around the ages of 50. The shooting is suspected to be connected to the Israel-Hamas war. Jordan has a large Palestinian population and has seen large protests against Israel over the war. Jordan is involved in investigating the shooting. Joining us live this morning to further discuss this breaking news alert is former Army Military Police Sergeant, Iraq War veteran, and military policy analyst Neiweem. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Good to be with you. Good morning.
So, Chris, it seems like every other day something is coming out as it relates to conflict in the Middle East, whether it relates to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Yemen Houthi rebels. With your military background, express where we are at this point, this breaking news. It seems like there was a target, but unfortunately, civilians were killed in the process.
Absolutely. You know, there's the old adage, war is hell, and that is certainly real for those people that are experiencing it. And if you look back decades, many American presidents have tried to secure what we call peace in the Middle East, and it's been a very difficult process because of this constant tension. Part of it's historical, with a lot of geopolitical, religious sects that have never really fully put themselves in order and harmonized, and then modern events, wars, tensions between Israel and Palestine over key issues, for example, a 2-state solution and the rest. But right now, we're really looking at this short-term goal of a ceasefire. And what we have right now is the U.S. government trying to put together a plan that could be feasible. We're hearing it's about 90% there, which could revolve around things like the Philadelphia corridor, about 1.4 kilometers of a security zone that Israel wants, and obviously releasing hostages in exchange for ease of tensions there. So those are kind of the big mainstay issues that we're looking at right now.
Chris, thank you so much for that detailed breakdown. And for many of the viewers this morning, and it's understandable, it's hard for them to visualize a ceasefire when they constantly see fighting going on. Like, how can you get to a ceasefire if there's still ongoing fighting? We know this past week there was a lot going on out in the West Bank with Israeli Defense Forces, which did lead to them finding those hostages in those tunnels. How do we move forward towards a ceasefire? Can fighting still happen as those negotiations are underway?
Well, I think the negotiations have to move forward with the fighting underway. And again, that's part of the balancing act. Is there's a difference between being a policymaker in Washington, D.C. in an air-conditioned office and being an Israeli Defense Force unit on the ground in a war zone. So there's been a lot of criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu. But again, he has to understand there's a greater picture here. He's looking at a very macro strategy involving Iran and this area being sort of a proxy war as sorts. And he's facing a lot of domestic political pressure. So in an odd way, the deadlock position of both Netanyahu and Sinwar with Hamas are kind of supporting themselves in terms of the political protests going on with Netanyahu makes it look like Hamas's position on hostages is giving them leverage. And on the other hand, the sort of bad faith actions of them and continued war and continued Israeli strikes sort of works against them and buttresses Netanyahu. So they have to move forward with talks. And I think that this U.S. framework, that's 90% the way there we're hearing, is going to be helpful to putting an option on the table where both of those leaders have to come in good faith and give it some strong consideration to stop this unnecessary fighting at this juncture in this conflict.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Chris, because you mentioned, good faith. Is it realistic to think that a terroristic organization like Hamas will, 1, act in good faith, but 2, actually uphold the ceasefire negotiations once they are settled?
So that's a great question. That's the key question. We have to assume the answer is no, with the caveat that they're still going to behave in this sort of what we'd say, realpolitik way, which is, by threat of force or other things. I mean, Israel certainly has the weaponized advantage, with the strikes that they've launched recently to come in and strike Hamas. So it's been sort of this balancing act between risk and reward, blood and treasure with some of these operations. But I think having a strong security framework in place that makes sense and that's sound can release the pressure, frankly, on both sides. Netanyahu gets a win. These protests can kind of abate. That's been the hardest test for him so far, is his own folks. Because remember, he also has a coalition in government that they want to maintain. So this is a critical moment in foreign policy. I think Hamas needs to come to the table and act in some good faith. Otherwise, it's going to work to their detriment as Israeli defense forces get more aggressive in their ground attacks.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the political tension that Netanyahu is getting. We've seen those protests every weekend out there at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where people are upset with Netanyahu. They're saying he's not doing enough. He's not doing enough with other world leaders to get those hostages returned safely. How does it work with the political aspect amidst war? Because you've been a part of war in real time as a soldier on the field, as someone who's in the midst of it. Does it help you, or does it kind of feel like you're being pulled on both sides?
So looking at it as a game with many different phases, and the end being victory, I think the leaders that stick things through end up there's all kinds of criticisms and problems and intensity during the conflict, but history has proven to show those as the true leaders, whether that's Winston Churchill, even presidents that were somewhat controversial, President George W. Bush and others. You don't really want to change the coach in the middle of a game of those consequences. So I think that there is a certain stick-to-itiveness to buttress these foreign policy goals in the region. And so I think it actually can work in your favor, but you also don't want to have flaring protests every single day outside of the executive office buildings either. It can be a distraction, and it can slow down policymakers and even affect the type of policy recommendations that are forwarded to the chief executives, in this case, Netanyahu, to make a decision. So I think that the stick-to-itiveness and the principled leadership in the arms of history will favor those that stick to it and make difficult decisions. Otherwise, retrograding, retreating, giving up ground, there's a whole variety of options that would probably only buttress Hamas's aggressive behavior relating to Israeli civilians.
Neiweem, a pleasure speaking with you about this breaking news alert. We appreciate your expertise and perspective on this topic. We know this isn't a one and done. There will continue to be developments in the coming hours, days, and maybe even months if a ceasefire isn't reached. As viewers are watching this interview, is there anything they need to be keeping a watchful eye on in the coming days? Anything else you'd like to add as it relates to conflict in the Middle East?
I think it's just looking at this U.S. peace framework ceasefire agreement. The U.S. government is stating that it's about 90% done. I think the details of that agreement are the next new hope in a ceasefire here in the near term.
Chris, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.